The courtroom was quiet at first except for the soft tapping of pens and the occasional whisper between lawyers. The judge sat high above everyone else, dressed in black robes, looking serious. A few people were seated in the public area. Some were there out of duty, others out of curiosity. But all eyes turned when the door opened and a young girl walked in with her backpack slung over one shoulder. She looked like any other teenager. Her clothes weren't fancy, just jeans and a hoodie. Her hair was tied back and she didn't wear much makeup. She had a notebook in one hand and a folder in the other. If you saw her on the street, you might think she was heading to school or meeting friends. But today she was here for something far more serious. Her name was Emily Hart, and she was only 17 years old. Emily wasn't on trial for anything violent or dangerous. She was accused of hacking into her school's computer system. According to the school, she had broken the law by accessing private data without permission. But Emily didn't see it that way. She believed she was doing the right thing. Exposing a problem that no one else was willing to fix. You see, Emily was brilliant, not just smart. She was the kind of person who could read a thick book once and remember almost everything inside it. She loved puzzles, logic games, and math problems. But more than that, she had a deep sense of fairness. When she saw something wrong, she couldn't just ignore it. It started with a simple question. Why did some students always seem to get better grades than others, even if they worked the same amount? Emily noticed a pattern. Students from wealthier families often scored higher, while those from poorer homes struggled, even if they tried hard. At first, she thought it was just luck or bias from teachers, but then she began digging deeper. She taught herself how to code, how to access digital systems, and how to analyze large amounts of data. It wasn't easy, but she had help from online courses and mentors she found through an after-school program for gifted teens. Eventually, she discovered that the school's grading system wasn't as fair as it seemed. There was a hidden algorithm behind the scores, one that unknowingly favored certain groups over others. When she tried to tell the school board what she found, they laughed at her. They told her to stop spreading nonsense and focus on her own studies. That made Emily angry. If they wouldn't listen, she would make sure someone else did. So she went into the school system again, not to steal or destroy anything, but to gather proof. She copied files that showed how the grading software worked, how it gave unfair advantages, and how it hurt students who already had it tough. Then she sent the files to a local news station. The story broke the next day. Reporters showed up at the school. Parents were upset. Teachers were confused, and the principal? He was furious. Within hours, Emily was suspended and charged with illegal access to a protected computer system. She was given a court date, and that's where we find her now, standing, alone in front of the judge. Most teenagers would be scared in this situation. Some might cry, others might beg for mercy. But Emily stood tall. She wasn't afraid, not really. She knew the truth, and she believed in it. What she didn't know was how hard it would be to convince the adults around her to listen. The judge looked down at her with raised eyebrows. "Miss Hart," he said, adjusting his glasses, "you're aware that this is a real courtroom, aren't you?" Emily nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." "You understand that you've been charged with a criminal offense?" "Yes." "And yet, you've chosen to represent yourself?" His voice carried a hint of disbelief. "I have," she replied calmly. There was a pause. The prosecutor, a man in his 40s with a neatly trimmed beard, cleared his throat and gave the judge a look as if to say, "This can't be serious." "Well," the judge said slowly, "I suppose we should hear what you have to say. But Miss Hart, let me warn you, if you try to waste this court's time, I won't be lenient just because you're young." Emily didn't flinch. "I understand, Your Honor. I promise not to waste anyone's time." From the side, a few people chuckled. Teenagers defending themselves in court? It sounded more like a joke than a real legal case. Even some of the reporters scribbling notes looked amused, but Emily ignored them. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, placing her folder on the table in front of her. Inside were documents, printouts, and handwritten notes. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment. She glanced at the prosecutor. He was flipping through his own papers, barely paying attention. He probably thought this would be an easy win. After all, how could a kid take on a full-grown lawyer in a real courtroom? Emily smiled slightly to herself. She had faced tougher challenges before. As the judge called the session into order, the room grew quiet again. The clerk announced the case number. The charges were read aloud and the prosecution prepared to speak. Emily adjusted her posture and focused. This was it. The start of something bigger than she ever imagined. And even though most people in the room still saw her as just another teenage girl in trouble, Emily knew the truth. She wasn't just there to defend herself. She was there to prove that justice doesn't always come from age or experience, but from courage, knowledge, and the will to stand up for what's right. The judge tapped his gavel once, signaling the start of the trial. "Prosecution," he said, looking toward the man with the neatly trimmed beard. "You may begin." The prosecutor stood up straight and cleared his throat. He was used to winning. Cases like this one. Cases where the defendant was young, unrepresented, and clearly outmatched. He glanced at Emily with a small smirk, as if she were just another teenager who had made a bad decision. "Your Honor," he began, "the state is here today to prove that Miss Hart knowingly accessed a protected computer system without authorization. She bypassed security protocols, entered private files, and shared them with the media, all without permission from school officials or law enforcement." He paused, then turned slightly toward Emily. "This wasn't about fairness. It was about breaking the law. And the evidence will show that beyond any doubt." Emily didn't flinch. She simply opened her folder and took out a single sheet of paper. Then she looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor," she said. "With respect, I would like to object." The courtroom fell silent for a moment. Even the reporters sitting in the back exchanged surprised glances. "Object?" the judge repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Miss Hart, you're not a lawyer. You can't just object whenever you feel like it." "I understand, Your Honor," Emily replied calmly. "But there are rules about what counts as evidence. And what the prosecution just said, well, that's not actually proven yet." The judge looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. Go ahead." Emily stepped forward. "The prosecution says I bypassed security protocols and entered private files. But they haven't shown any real proof of that yet. They're assuming facts that aren't on record." She pointed to the folder in front of her. "I'd like to request that the court ask for a digital audit of the school's server logs. If we look at the timestamps and access records, we'll see that I never broke into anything. I only accessed information that was already available to students through their accounts." The judge frowned. "Is that true?" The prosecutor hesitated. "Well, we believe." "Belief isn't enough in court," Emily interrupted gently. "You need facts." There was a murmur in the courtroom. Some people started whispering. A few lawyers in the audience leaned forward, suddenly paying more attention. The judge tapped his pen against the bench. "Miss Hart," he said, "where exactly did you learn to talk like this?" Emily gave a small smile. "From watching legal documentaries and reading case law online." A few people chuckled softly, but the judge held up a hand. "Enough. We'll proceed. But Miss Hart, if you continue interrupting without good reason, I will hold you in contempt." "Yes, Your Honor," she said politely. The prosecutor rolled his shoulders and tried to regain control of the room. "Fine," he said. "Let's move on. We have testimony from the school's IT director, who will confirm that Miss Hart gained unauthorized access." He gestured toward the witness stand, where a man in a button-down shirt sat waiting. The clerk swore him in and he took his seat. "Mr. Collins," the prosecutor began, "can you tell us what happened the day the school discovered the breach?" Mr. Collins adjusted his glasses. "Yes. We noticed unusual activity in our system. Someone had accessed multiple student records outside of normal hours. When we checked further, we found that someone had downloaded several confidential files." "And do you know who did this?" "Yes," Mr. Collins said, pointing at Emily. "It was her." Emily didn't react immediately. She waited until the murmurs died down before standing up again. "Your Honor," she said, "may I cross-examine the witness?" The judge sighed. You're not a lawyer, Miss Hart. But yes, go ahead. Emily walked over to the witness stand. Mr. Collins, she asked, how exactly did you determine it was me? Well, he said, we looked at the IP address the files came from. It matched the one registered to your account. Can IP addresses be faked or spoofed? Emily asked. They can, Mr. Collins admitted. And did you check for signs of spoofing before making your accusation? No, he said after a pause. Emily nodded. So, basically, you assumed it was me, because the address looked familiar, but you didn't verify whether it could have been forged? Mr. Collins shifted uncomfortably. We didn't think it necessary. Interesting, Emily said. Then she turned to the judge. Your Honor, I'd like to submit a motion to suppress this witness's testimony until a full network analysis is completed. The courtroom exploded into whispers. Suppress? That was a word most adults barely understood. And now a teenager was using it? The judge looked stunned. Miss Hart, he said slowly, do you even know what you're asking for? Yes, Your Honor, she said confidently. If the prosecution wants to use technical evidence, it needs to be accurate and verified. Otherwise, we're just guessing. And in court, we don't guess. We prove. For the first time, the judge seemed unsure. He looked at the prosecutor. Is there anyone from cybersecurity present who can confirm this data? The prosecutor hesitated. Not at the moment. Then I'll allow the motion, the judge said finally. We'll take a short recess while the school provides verified logs. As the gavel came down, Emily sat back down and flipped open her notebook. She smiled slightly. Things were starting to change. Around her, people were beginning to treat her less like a kid and more like a serious player in this courtroom game. Some of the reporters were scribbling faster. One of the lawyers nearby whispered something to his colleague, nodding toward Emily. And for the first time since walking into the courtroom, the judge looked at her with something new in his eyes. Respect, Emily, knew this was only the beginning. The hardest part was still ahead. But she also knew something else. She wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was proving that age didn't matter when you had truth on your side, and she was just getting started. The courtroom was quiet again after the short break, but now there was a different kind of energy in the air. People were watching Emily more closely. Some had started whispering about her like she wasn't just another kid in trouble, like she might actually know what she was doing. When the judge returned, he looked at Emily with new eyes. Miss Hart, he said slowly, I've never seen someone your age handle themselves like this in court. But let me remind you, you're still not a lawyer. Emily nodded. Yes, Your Honor, I understand that. Good, he said. Now, let's continue. The prosecutor stood up again, clearly trying to regain control. He looked less confident than before. His earlier assumptions had been shaken. The digital logs hadn't yet come back, so he couldn't use them as evidence. Yet, that meant he had to try a different approach. Your Honor, he began, regardless of how Miss Hart accessed the files, the fact remains that she shared them with the media without permission. That alone is a violation of school policy and possibly the law. He turned toward Emily. Did you or did you not send confidential documents to a news station? Emily took a deep breath. Then she stood up calmly. I did, Your Honor, she admitted. But I didn't do it for revenge or attention. I did it because no one else would listen. She opened her folder again and pulled out several printed pages. She walked over to the clerk and handed them up. These are copies of the internal emails between the school board and the software company that created our grading system, she explained. You'll see that they knew the algorithm was biased. They knew it gave better grades to students from wealthier families. And instead of fixing it, they chose to ignore it. The judge flipped through the pages, his eyebrows rising higher. With each one, These look real. They are real, Emily said. And if you read them carefully, you'll see that the school was warned months ago. They even tested the system and saw the results. But they kept using it anyway. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Reporters leaned forward, scribbling. Faster. Parents who had come to support their children sat up straighter. Even the prosecutor looked uneasy. Emily continued. I didn't hack anything. I didn't steal anything. All I did was show people the truth. The school made a choice to hide it. I made a choice to expose it. The judge looked at the prosecutor. Is any of this disputed? The man hesitated. Well, we don't have reason to doubt the authenticity of the emails. Then why haven't we heard about this before? The judge asked sharply. The prosecutor cleared his throat. Because this case isn't about the school's decisions. It's about whether Miss Hart broke the law. Emily stepped in again. Then let's talk about the law. She reached into her folder and pulled out a small notebook. In California, it's illegal to access a computer system without authorization. But according to Section 502 of the Penal Code, if someone accesses information that is already available to them, even if it's by mistake, it's not considered unauthorized access. She paused. The grading data was accessible to every student through their personal accounts. I simply used my account to get it. I didn't crack any codes. I didn't break any firewalls. I only did what any other student could have done, if they had known what to look for. The judge stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned to the prosecutor. Do you have any proof that Miss Hart bypassed actual security measures? The prosecutor swallowed hard. Not at this time. The judge sighed. This case is getting more complicated by the minute. Just then a new voice spoke from the back of the room. I believe I can help clarify some of these points. Everyone turned. A tall woman in a dark suit was walking toward the front. She looked serious, professional. Most people didn't recognize her at first, but when she reached the bench and introduced herself, the whole room fell silent. My name is Attorney Rachel Lynn, she said. I'm here on behalf of the National Center for Educational Justice. We've been following this case closely, and I'd like to offer expert testimony regarding the legal and ethical implications of automated grading systems. The judge blinked. You're here as an expert witness? Yes, Your Honor. Emily smiled slightly. She had sent those emails weeks ago. She hadn't expected anyone to respond so quickly, but now she had help. Attorney Lynn placed a thick file on the table. Inside are reports from 3 independent studies showing how biased algorithms affect student performance. There's also a statement from a former federal judge supporting Miss Hart's legal reasoning. Gasps filled the courtroom. The judge looked stunned. Miss Hart, how exactly do you know a former federal judge? Emily shrugged. We met online. I asked him questions about constitutional law. He liked my curiosity. More murmurs. Some people laughed quietly. The judge shook his head. This is unusual, but true, Emily said. The prosecutor looked frustrated. He tried to argue that none of this changed the fact that Emily had gone public with private information. But Emily had a response ready. The public has a right to know how schools make decisions that affect students' futures, she said. If the system is unfair, hiding it doesn't protect anyone, it just makes things worse. She looked around the courtroom. That's why I did what I did, not to break the law, but to stand up for fairness. For the first time, the judge didn't immediately reply. He looked at the papers in front of him, he looked at the experts. He looked at Emily, and for the first time he looked like he wasn't sure who was really in charge here. Outside, people were starting to gather near the courthouse doors. Word had spread fast. Students from Emily's school had come to support her. Parents were talking about what they had just learned. Inside, the trial was no longer just about one girl. It was about something bigger, and Emily Hart was at the center of it all. The courtroom was buzzing after Attorney Rachel Lynn's testimony. The judge had taken some time to go through the reports, and it was clear he was starting to see things differently. But the biggest surprise was still waiting to unfold. Emily sat quietly at the table, flipping through her notes, calm as ever. She knew what came next would change everything, not just for her case, but for how people saw her forever. The judge finally looked up from the papers. Miss Hart, he said slowly, you've made some very strong arguments today. You've shown us evidence, questioned witnesses, and even brought in legal experts. He paused. But I have to ask, where exactly did you learn all this? A few people in the audience leaned forward, curious. Even the prosecutor looked interested now. Emily took a deep breath. Then, with the same calm look on her face, she stood up and said, "Your Honor, there's something I haven't told the court yet." A hush fell over the room. "I'm not just a high school student," she continued. "I'm also a licensed legal assistant, and I've been admitted to practice law in 2 states. Silence, then shock. Gasps filled the courtroom. Some people turned to each other in disbelief. Reporters dropped their pens. The prosecutor stared at her like he had just heard something impossible. The judge blinked. "You're saying you're qualified to work as a lawyer?" Emily nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I started studying law online when I was 13. I joined a mentorship program for young legal minds, and by 14 I was helping real attorneys with research and case preparation. At 16 I passed the bar exam in 2 states. I can show my credentials if needed." She reached into her folder and pulled out a thick envelope. She handed it to the clerk, who opened it and scanned the pages inside. After a moment, the clerk passed them to the judge. Everyone waited. The judge read through the documents carefully. His eyes widened slightly. He looked back at Emily with a new kind of respect, and maybe even a little embarrassment. "These are real," he said quietly. "You actually passed the bar?" "Yes, sir," Emily said. "I did it under special permission. There are laws that allow minors to take the bar if they meet the academic requirements. I met them." The judge looked stunned. "And no one thought to tell me this before the trial began?" "I didn't want to use it as a trick," Emily explained. "I wanted to prove myself first. I wanted to show that I could stand here and make a real case without hiding behind my title." There was a long silence. Then the judge finally spoke. "Miss Hart, or should I say, Ms. Hart, I don't know what impresses me more, your knowledge of the law or your courage in using it." Emily smiled slightly. "Thank you, Your Honor." From the back of the room, someone whispered, "This is unreal." And it kind of was. The prosecutor sat down slowly, clearly realizing that the whole tone of the case had changed. He had come in expecting to deal with a confused teenager. Now he was facing someone who could legally argue circles around him. The judge cleared his throat. "Let me get this straight. You've been representing yourself, while secretly being a fully trained legal professional?" Emily nodded. "Yes. I wanted to see if I'd be taken seriously if I walked in looking like a regular student. I wanted to test whether people would listen to me if I didn't wear a suit or carry a fancy title." "And what did you find?" the judge asked. "That most adults assume teenagers don't know what they're talking about," she replied. "Even when we do." The judge gave a small smile. "Well, Miss Hart, or Ms. Hart, I think you've proven your point." Then another man entered the courtroom. He was older, dressed in a sharp suit, and carried himself like someone important. He walked straight up to Emily and gave her a quiet nod. "Mr. Delgado," Emily said, smiling. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Do I know you, sir?" "I'm Thomas Delgado," the man said, "senior partner at Delgado and Fields Legal Group, and I'm proud to say that Emily has worked with our firm for the past year." More gasps. Emily added, "I've helped prepare cases involving education policy, digital privacy, and youth rights. I've also contributed to 3 published legal journals." One of the reporters dropped his notebook. The judge shook his head in disbelief. "So, let me understand. You're not just a genius. You're not just a student. You're also a working attorney?" Emily shrugged. "Technically, yes, but I still have to graduate high school." That got a few laughs from the crowd. The judge looked at the prosecutor. "Is there anything left in your case that hasn't been challenged or weakened?" The prosecutor hesitated. Then he sighed. "Not really, Your Honor." The judge leaned back in his chair. "Then perhaps it's time we reconsidered why we're even here." He looked directly at Emily. "You came into this courtroom looking like a kid in trouble, but you've shown us that appearances can be deceiving. You've handled yourself with professionalism, intelligence, and integrity." He paused. And I think it's safe to say, this won't be the last time we hear your name, Emily smiled. Thank you, Your Honor. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had grown even bigger. Students were holding signs that read justice for Emily and truth over fear. Parents were talking to reporters, asking questions about the grading system. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Emily's story was spreading faster than ever. Inside, the judge called for a short recess. The next part of the trial would decide everything, but for the first time, everyone in the room knew one thing for sure. Emily Hart wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was changing the way people thought, about young people, about fairness, and about what it really means to fight for justice. The courtroom was packed when everyone returned from the break. Reporters stood near the back with cameras rolling. Parents sat quietly, waiting to hear what would happen next. Students from Emily's school filled the last few seats, holding phones up to capture every moment. Emily sat calmly at the table, flipping through her notes one last time. She wasn't nervous anymore. She had said everything she needed to say. Now it was up to the judge to decide. The gavel tapped once. The judge looked around the room before speaking. After careful review, he began, I have come to a decision. Regarding this case, everyone leaned forward. The prosecution has failed to prove that Miss Hart acted with criminal intent or that she violated any laws beyond reasonable doubt. In fact, the evidence presented suggests that her actions were motivated by a desire to expose unfairness, not to break the law. He paused, then added, Therefore, I am dismissing all charges against her. A wave of sound filled the courtroom. Some people clapped softly. Others whispered excitedly. A few reporters rushed out to send updates to their newsrooms. Emily took a deep breath. Then she stood up and gave a small smile. She had won. The judge looked at her again. Miss Hart, or should I say Ms. Hart, you've made your point clearly. You've shown us that youth doesn't mean lack of knowledge, and you've reminded us all that sometimes the truth comes from the most unexpected places. Emily nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. As she gathered her things, a group of people came over to congratulate her. Her parents hugged her tightly. Attorney Rachel Lynn shook her hand and said, You did something today that many adults wouldn't. Dare try. Thomas Delgado, her mentor from the law firm, smiled proudly. You're going to do great things, Emily. Outside the courthouse, the crowd was even bigger than before. When Emily stepped outside, people started cheering. Students waved signs. Parents thanked her. Cameras flashed from every direction. Reporters shouted questions. Emily, how does it feel to win your own case? What's next for you? Do you think schools will change now because of what you did? Emily raised a hand, signaling for quiet. After a few seconds, the noise died down. I'm glad the court saw the truth, she said, but this was never just about me. It was about fairness, about making sure that every student gets a chance to succeed, no matter where they come from. She paused, and I believe we can make that happen, one step at a time. Then she turned and walked away, followed by her family and friends. In the days that followed, Emily's story went viral. News channels across the country talked about the teenage girl who defended herself in court and won. Social media filled with posts praising her courage and intelligence. More importantly, the pressure on the school increased. Parents demanded answers. Lawmakers asked questions. And within a week, the school board announced that they would stop using the biased grading system and bring in experts to create a fairer one. Emily didn't stop there. She started a nonprofit called Youth Voice Legal, offering free legal help and advice to other students who faced unfair treatment at school. She held online workshops teaching teens how to understand their rights. She even spoke at a national education conference, standing in front of hundreds of teachers and school leaders. And all of it started with one simple question. Why do some students always get better grades than others? Now people listened when she spoke. They respected her ideas. And most importantly, they realized that young people could make a real difference if given the chance. Back at school, things weren't exactly the same. Some teachers treated her differently. Some students looked up to her like she was a hero. But Emily stayed grounded. She still showed up on time. She still did her homework, and she still helped her classmates when they needed it. One afternoon after class, a younger student approached her. "Hey, Emily," the girl asked nervously. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure," Emily said. "How did you know you could do all that stuff? How did you know you could stand up in court and argue with real lawyers?" Emily smiled. "Because I believed in what I was doing. And because I knew that if I didn't speak up, nobody else might." The girl thought for a moment. Then she said, "I want to be like you someday." Emily patted her shoulder. "You already are. Just keep asking questions, keep looking for the truth, and don't let anyone tell you that you can't make a difference." The girl grinned and walked off. Emily watched her go, then looked up at the sky. It was getting late. The sun was setting behind the school building. She pulled out her phone and opened a message from Thomas Delgado. It read, "Great job today. Ready for the next case?" Emily typed back, "Always." She slipped the phone into her pocket and started walking home. Behind her, the world was changing. One idea, one voice, one brave teenager at a time, and Emily Hart was just getting started.